Good afternoon and welcome back to a new episode of Indie Fantasy Friday Review Reports with Katherine D. Graham. For those of you who don't know me, hi, my name is Katherine. I am an Amazon best-selling fantasy author, a Reedy Discovery reviewer, and a full-time developmental editor. And reading for fun is my passion. I know I live in books all the time. But every week on Fridays on YouTube in the month of June, I was reviewing indie fantasy books, and I'm continuing that trend in July. So come on in, settle down, grab a notebook, or scroll to the description box if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, and we will go ahead and jump right into our brand new books for this week. So we have 4 books that we'll be reviewing today, all of which, of course, are indie, and they are all fantasy. Indie meaning self-published or published by a small independent press. I do want to start today out with a huge thank you to everybody who has been reading my reviews on Reedy Discovery and submitting their books to me to review on Reedy Discovery. I was able to hit the top 10 list for Reedy Discovery for the month of June, which is a huge accomplishment. Thank you again from the bottom of my heart. I've had some amazing books come from that experience. The first book that we are reviewing today is actually a Reedy Discovery submission. This is Ashes, Ashes, and it is a dark, young adult urban fantasy book with some mythology and magic thrown in on the side, and a solid 5-star review. Now, I've got to say, I was blown away by how much I fell in love with this book. I opened it up and I was like, oh, okay, here's these school kids. They're going along. They're also magic users. It was very Mortal Instruments in feel starting out. They lived together in a little building that made me think of the Institute and Shadowhunters. And, they're the only ones who can fight the monsters and all of that. But it quickly left the cliches behind and branched out into its whole new world. The academy aspect of this book is really on the sidelines. It focuses heavily on the main character's friendship and their found family, which I loved. And it pulled the style of the story, which is very dark in content in places. You actually have the main character have friends pass away in this book. You actually had that darkness balanced by witty banter that made me think back to like Buffy the Vampire Slayers. So if you like Mortal Instruments and Buffy the Vampire Slayers mixed into one with some young adult drama that isn't over the top cliche, I would definitely recommend checking out Ashes, Ashes. You can see the entire review for Ashes, Ashes at the Reedy Discovery link in the description box. And if you're watching on YouTube, you'll need to pop on over to Facebook or, not YouTube. If you're watching on Twitter, you'll need to pop over to YouTube or Facebook to see that. The next book that I've selected for today's review is Argent Blade Plague Carrier by Courtney. Argent Blade Plague Carrier is the second volume in the Argent Blade series and a dark urban fantasy. I have to say that this book is very emotionally gripping, and it is borderline dark to the point where it's almost too dark, but never quite crosses that line. This book is not for the squeamish. There is blood and gore in a manner that you wish you could look away, but you can't. But the story itself is what really, really shines in this book. There's a diverse cast of characters, which I truly appreciated from the author. Characters from every wake of life. There are heavy topics addressed like loss of a loved one, bearing regrets, a whole bunch of things scattered throughout this pending doom that the Order of the Argent Blade is facing off in this urban fantasy book. Overall, I say Argent Blade Plague Carrier actually takes the Argent Blade series up a notch if you've read the first book. I believe I rated the first book a 4, but Argent Blade Plague Carrier is a solid 5. Well done, Courtney. Definitely go check that out. The link for that is in the description box as well. The next book I have is a 2-star, but I have a little bit of a disclaimer to throw in here. I have read the first volume of the Decoding of Joes series by Lali A. Love, and she submitted this book to me through Reedy Discovery as the second book. The first book I gave a solid 5-star review. It is a rich world. It's a young adult fantasy, but it's a dual dimension fantasy, so they exist in their world part of the time, going to school, being regular kids, and then they also exist in this alternate plane where they're training to be these almost celestial type beings. And in the first book, Lali paints such a vivid world and brings us into the not cut and dried, the not pretty life of teenage writing so well that I gave that a 5. In book 2, the pacing is very slow because I think she's trying to reestablish too much of what she has established in the first book. That was good 60 pages in before action really picked up. So once I got into that action in book 2, it felt more like what I had read with the first volume. So ultimately, I felt like for the really slow pacing in the beginning and then very sudden changes in the characters without any explanation from how they were in book 1 to how they were in book 2, suddenly they're different with really no explanation at all. Like they're stronger and more confident and all of that. While I do think their characters are a celebration of diversity, which I respect, I felt like their growth needed more of an explanation. And we didn't need the huge rehash for the first 60 pages before we got into the meat of the story. So I definitely cannot recommend the first volume of this series highly enough. The second volume wasn't really for me, but it may be for you, if you don't mind the slower pace. The last book that I have today is The Dying Light by Emily Rooke. I know we've had a lot of dark fantasy today, but that's just sort of what I had picked up over the last week or so. Emily Rooke is the pseudonym for this author. If you're looking for them on social media, you'll find them under the name Lali Rooke on Instagram or Facebook or wherever they're at. But The Dying Light is a dark young adult fantasy. It's faced in an almost dystopian world where a group of children become the only family that each other has and tries to overcome their situation and survive in a setting where everybody wants to take advantage of them and everybody wants to abuse them and everybody wants to manipulate them, and so they have to depend on each other to overcome the horrors of their world. It's got a strong, diverse cast with LGBTQ representation and other representation, and I felt like Lali does a good job of balancing the heavy parts of being a kid that we don't want to look at with a fantasy that makes it readable and makes it real and raw. And you could definitely tell that the authors poured their heart and soul into this piece. So it was a solid 5-star read for me. There is a second volume out in this series now called We Are Shadows that I have not read yet, but I'm excited to read. So you can pick that up at the link in my bio as well, or the link in the description. Closing out today, I would like to ask for your recommendations because I'm picking back up on my summer reading challenge. It says Indie Writing Challenge here, and that's my typo. Sorry, everybody. But I'm looking for books to read. So if you have an indie fantasy author that you love, or you are an indie fantasy author, and you would like somebody to read and review your book, and you don't mind it showing up here on YouTube, please drop suggestions in the comments, because I will be adding them to my to-be-read list, which is insanely long, but I'm always looking for more. And I do keep this indie. I do respect traditional publishers a lot, but my heart truly lies with the indie authors for the sake of these reviews. If you liked the reviews, you can catch up on my old episodes by going to my YouTube channel, and if you would like to see more of them, I will be doing these on Fridays in July on my YouTube channel as well. So like and subscribe, and I hope to see you again next week. Bye, everybody.